Kick us off, Sarah.
All right, welcome to the video log for the week. Chris and I are still working in separate locations. Chris and the rest of the Senate is all still Zooming from home, and House members are mostly here in the building. So you may recognize that I have taken over the Senate Transportation Committee for this noon hour while we're recording this, and I'm really excited to bring this interview to you today because many of us, you can't really throw a stick in Vermont without seeing a car that has the bumper sticker that says "Think globally, act locally," and that's why the topic that we're taking up today is really inspiring, because it's a really clear example of a group of people in Vermont who thought that climate change was a serious problem and said, you know, it's all well and good for us to lobby our state or our federal government officials to help with climate change, but what should we be doing here locally, and how can we organize ourselves around it? So welcome to Steve Maier, former member of the House of Representatives, and Steve and I served on the healthcare committee with Chris way back when. Were you on the committee at the same time as Steve?
I wasn't ever. I was in the House with Steve, but not then on healthcare. But anyway, it's great to have you with us, Steve. And since you've been freed from your service in Montpelier, it seems like you've been doing some work locally on climate. So that we're excited to have you. Welcome. Tell us what's going on in Addison County.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's been a while. Believe it or not, it's been 12 years since I've been there working with you in the State House. So that's a long time that you've been there. So congratulations and thank you for the service that you do for all of us here in Vermont. And thanks for leading the Climate Caucus. I'm just going to talk for a couple minutes about the work we're doing here in Addison County. I'm a founding board member of CEACAC. So that stands for the Climate Economy Action Center of Addison County. We're a small nonprofit. We formed about 3 years ago. Came out of work that a number of us sat down in 2017, pretty depressed about the state of the nation and what we'd be able to do on climate issues at that point. And the state wasn't doing much more than that, quite honestly, at the time either. So for a variety of reasons, we decided to focus locally. And as we've learned and done the work over the last several years, we've become more and more convinced that a lot of really important climate action will need to happen at the local level. And that's what I'd just like to talk about a little bit, and talk about the intersection between local climate action and state climate action. So CEAC, just to say, our mission is, we're a mission-driven organization, and our mission is to promote a healthy local economy. We have economy in our name, through deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in Addison County. So we believe, and we're working toward a future that is different from where we are now, transitions from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels, and that ultimately that will lead to a healthier and more sustainable economy here.
Let me just jump in, Steve, and say, you know, we hear, this is one of the most common themes of questions that I get, and I think Sarah would probably say the same, is, you know, this is great. Thanks for the information of what you're doing up here. What can I do? This comes to us all the time. And so that's why Sarah and I wanted to talk to you, because you're going to help us answer some of that, I think. And we'll talk a little bit about updating folks as we do about what's going on in Montpelier, and a lot of that filters back. But as I understand, in Addison County, you've in some ways mirrored what's been happening at the state level, coming up with your own climate action plan steps. I think now you're in the process of kind of shopping that around the community to get feedback. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Update us about that, and then what are some of the steps? What are you contemplating? If everyone says this is great, what would we look for in the next year or two?
Sure. Thank you. The first thing we did, first sort of major project we did a year in the summer of 2020 was a greenhouse gas inventory for our county. And we were a little surprised, although in hindsight we shouldn't have been, that when we ran the numbers for Addison County, we found out that the sector of our economy that was producing more greenhouse gases than any other was the agriculture sector. So we have, I think, the most or second most farm animals in the state, in our county, more than people. We have more animals than people. So it's not a surprise on the one hand, but it's a challenge on the other hand to figure out how do we go about helping our farms and our farmers reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So part of as we then went into our climate action planning process, we divided up into 3 sectors that were our 3 biggest sectors: agriculture, transportation, and that buildings and heating sector. And so our actions are organized in those 3 different areas. And we've identified a variety of actions, some of which are clear to us that there's only so much we can do, or maybe there's not anything we can do, because we need authorizing legislation, or we need funding, or we need other things that need to happen at the state level. So things that I know you're working on, like the clean heat standard, or what the replacement is going to be for the transportation climate initiative. Some of those things are not things that we're spending a lot of time focusing on, because what we have to say doesn't really matter that terribly much, and we know that you're doing that work. But we know that when we look at building improvements, for example, we know that we need, for all new buildings, we need to move toward a place where new buildings are all built to a net zero standard, at least. And that then leads us to talk about building standards and building permits. And we find out, well, we sort of have voluntary standards in Vermont, and they aren't very well enforced in many communities. A few communities they are, but less well in most other communities. And so we probably need help from you to do that, but the lion's share of the on the ground work is going to happen here locally. We need to work with each of our towns and select boards and planning commissions and zoning boards. There's a lot of real groundwork here in the community that needs to happen. If you look at the transportation sector, we know that 10 years from now, we need electric vehicles charging stations all over, everywhere, right? And so what does the gas station of the future look like? And who's going to make that happen, right? I think that's likely to be a private sector initiative. How do we provide the right kinds of incentives? Maybe we do need some requirements, but how do we help them with the transition away from? I mean, I imagine there'll be a period of 5 or some number of years where the pumps, if you will, that there are multiple pumps for electric vehicles, and there's one little pump out in the back that has gas in it, sort of like you might find over a diesel right. These days or something. But
the kerosene pump of the future, right?
Yeah.
So are you working with the? Sorry to cut you off, but are you working with the RPCs and there's some private investment, there's certainly public investment in charging infrastructure. Is your group working with communities to say, here's where we think they need to go? Is that an example of what you're doing?
No, we haven't gotten to that level yet. We are working with the regional planning commissions, and we have been working with a few of our towns so far, but we really we need to be able to expand that. Our group is, we're small and we're mostly volunteer at this point in time, so our capacity is somewhat limited. I think that's an interesting and challenging question across the board, is how do you build the capacity within our communities to do this work? I'll just jump ahead and say we had an early review session with some of our closer advisors and friends, and one of the questions we got asked was, so what is all this going to mean for jobs in our economy? And so we spent a little bit of time trying to estimate jobs. What was it going to take? And we found that the Energy Action Network's done some really great work, and we just sort of extrapolated from that. But just to make the point, it's both exciting and a little scary that we estimated how many workers would be needed to carry out the weatherization work and installing cold climate heat pumps and heat pump hot water heaters, and to install electric vehicle charging stations. And just for those 4 functions, we estimated that as many as 250 new jobs would need to be created just within Addison County to carry out those goals that we're identifying. And those jobs, that's 250 jobs, each of which would last for the 8 years that we did the estimates for out to 2030. So that's, as I said, both exciting and scary. How do we make that happen? We don't necessarily have the answers to that, other than that we know it'll be different across different sectors.
So if someone went onto your website, they would see that you all have adopted a climate action plan. You've got you've got your share as Addison County, your share of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we as a state have agreed to, and you've got a lot of ideas put in place. And I think the thing that's really intriguing to me is the resource that you all are going to be for your municipalities around Addison County. And also it sounds like you're thinking about ways to be a resource to individuals and homeowners and businesses as well. So what are you excited about in terms of the potential for supporting municipal governments? Because I know that we get a lot of questions from folks about, how can I do what needs to be done in my community?
Yeah, so that there are a variety of things that need to happen municipally. Some of the more straightforward ones have to do with municipal buildings. It's easier. I know I also serve on the Middlebury Energy Committee, and we've been able to work with our select board and others in town, our other departments within town government to actually adopt a goal for 2030 to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in municipal buildings, not across the community, but in our own municipal buildings by 80%, and a particular plan to do that. And it involves a lot of fuel switching. So, whenever a furnace needs to be replaced or whatever, we assumed and estimated and that would be done with heat pumps and not with a fossil fuel system. We have a sort of a wonderful classic example going on now with our town library, where they have a 40-plus-year-old oil burner that has needed to be replaced for a while, and they did the engineering work a couple of years ago and found out they could replace that system with a heat pump system without even a backup, just given the circumstances. But now they've sort of had to put that on hold. The costs don't quite work out. There are other renovations that they need to do at the library. So anyway, it's sort of back in the planning mode. But one of the bills that I know you're working on there would provide some funding, some grant funding and or loan funding that would support a project like that, and maybe just push it over that line in terms of affordability of the town to make the right choice from a climate standpoint. So stuff like that it will be really great if you can push that bill across the finish line. So
yeah, and I Sarah, do you happen to know the bill number? I'm sorry, but we'll get that.
Strangely enough, I don't.
Bob will put that in, but it's what we think of, or I think of, as the municipal SEMP bill that is modeled after the state energy modernization
Management, I think.
Management program, where the state, we put $5 million into a revolving loan fund, and then when a state building has the opportunity to do some weatherization, they can take from the fund, and then their savings, then there's immediate energy savings, and they use that savings to replenish the fund. The bill that Steve is referencing extends access to that fund and some grants for municipalities. And it's not the end all and be all, but it does address just the situation you're talking about, where a library or a public building, we're the public are actors in this too, and we need to make sure we're leading by example. And these are, if you confront the costs, they are cost-effective investments. And so I understand that has moved through committee, which meets an important first deadline, and we'll be talking about that as the session wears on. But it is a small example of what the legislature is trying to do to empower people acting locally. And so,
at the same time, it probably is. My guess is that it would be hard to expand it to include what I'm about to suggest. But we also have found out just recently, in the last month or two, that our technical center here in Middlebury, the Hannaford Career Center, is also, they've actually put forward a bond vote to do a series of renovations, including replacing their heating system, but not with heat pumps. So we sort of, cat is a little bit out of the bag, and we might or might not be able to help them make a different choice. But my understanding of the law, this bill that was passed or is now progressing, is that it would not include school districts, for example, just municipalities. So hopefully I understand it wrong, but if not, and you could look into maybe extending it a little bit, then it might help in that situation.
We can fix it up in the Senate, but oftentimes when we refer to municipalities, we automatically include school districts. So that's a good marker. Thank you for the heads up. Sarah, we don't have too much more time. So why don't you give Steve the best question you've got?
That's excellent. So Steve, oftentimes what Chris and I are doing is not only rallying our climate leaders here in the State House, but also talking out to Vermonters, talking to different groups and individuals about how they can get involved and move climate action in Vermont. And so, if you wanted to give just a quick inspiration of how to get this started in another county somewhere else in Vermont, what sorts of heads do you need to have around that planning table in order to replicate this in other places?
Great question. And I think our website information will be on the screen here, and so people can go see more about what we've done, and there's information. There's our draft plan is there. So if you're really into the details, you can do that. But we also have summary resources, FAQs, and other things there that people have a little less time can dive into. And we'd welcome your questions. I think we're a small nonprofit trying to do a countywide climate plan is a little bit of a grand experiment. And so, and there are other climate plans that have happened in Vermont. So I think there are different examples going on. The town of Hartford adopted a climate action plan, and it's a great plan, and it's a municipal plan. The town said, yes, we're going to say yes to this plan and work on these actions over the next 10 years and adjust it as we need to. A small nonprofit, we don't have a particular authority to make anything happen. So, it's an interesting thing that we've a little bit of audacity that we've come into this with, but also it'll be interesting how successful we are is going to be completely dependent on the relationships that we build here locally, and on all kinds of people coming forward and raising their hands and saying, yes, I want to get involved with that. I will help with that. those gas stations are ones that I own. I want to help put in EV chargers. How can I help you do that? On the farming, I mentioned farming before. How can we help our farmers implement both field, different kind of crop management practices, feed practices for their animals? There's interesting new research coming along about how farms of every stripe can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. But I think there's a longer set of work that needs to happen there to bring people along so they understand what's possible. And frankly, in that sector especially, but across the sectors, we're going to need to have some financial support to help people make these changes. And that'll be a big theme coming out of communities and businesses, I think.
Well, what's really exciting to me about the work that you're doing is I know that we can count on you to come back and tell us what more we should advocate for on the legislative level to help you fill in those gaps, whether it's a funding source that you need for a particular part of the plan implementation, or whether it's a different program. Maybe you need some help with workforce development so you can get those workers out there doing the weatherization projects you need, or switching out heating sources. All of those things we want to hear about, because we want to be able to make sure that as more communities are embracing, or even countywide, as you're doing in Addison, are really embracing the idea of acting on climate, that the state of Vermont is here as a partner for that.
And I would just say, this is a slow evolution, far too slow probably, but as more and more resources become available, what excites me about the work you're doing is Addison County, you'll already have had some discussion when the state finally says, well, here's some money for X. And you'll say, great, we know what to do with that. Or you might come back and say, well, be sure to let us do this when you're also giving us this money. Or like you said, it's not just towns, it's got to be schools involved in our local efficiency granting opportunities. So this is really good. Thank you very much. You're tackling an important project and hopefully offering a model for others around the state to look at as we're all trying to answer the what can I do myself, and people have different capacities. So thanks for helping to create that model.
Yeah, thanks for having me and inviting me to be on. And I'm excited. I'm excited that the kinds of work that we're doing locally, our plan and others like it, really can give people the answer to what they can do. Sarah, to the question you posed early on. So, what can I do? What can we do? We have over 70 actions laid out in our plan, and there's got to be something in there for you if you're interested in taking action. So thanks again for having me, and good luck with the rest of the session. And maybe as the pandemic hopefully continues in the right direction, and you're all going back there, Chris, maybe we could do something together there at the State House later on this year. I'd welcome the opportunity to come over and be a part of that.
Terrific. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks to Bob the Green Guy for helping us produce these videos.